Hey Flute Nerds, welcome to this month's mini masterclass. This month we're diving into those building blocks of music, scales. Now, I know what you might be thinking, scales, oh man, do we have to? But stay with me. This lesson is not about how to boringly grind through all of your major and minor keys. Instead, we're going to talk about how to make your scales feel musical and expressive, and that will make them much more enjoyable practice. If you haven't done already, make sure you download the Scale Refresher info sheet. It's a great place to start if you need a handy overview or a reminder about what scales are, how they're built, and how we figure out key signatures. It also includes a useful circle of fifths, both a black and white one for printing and a colorful one for easy gamification. But today in this video, we're going to explore what happens when you stop playing scales like boring finger exercises. Scales are your daily opportunity to practice being expressive. So we'll have a look at how some of the great flute pedagogues like Marcel Moyse, Michel Debost, and William Bennett approached scales expressively. They didn't just play scales for technique. They used them to develop their tone, phrasing, articulation, and musical intention. And today, I'll walk you through how to do the same. So why should we bother making scales expressive in the first place? Can't we just blast through them for finger speed and call it a day? Scales are simple and repetitive, and that's what makes them so powerful. Unlike repertoire or studies, scales are your playing, but completely stripped back to the basics. There's no tricky rhythms or passages to distract you. So if something's not quite right, like your air support, finger movement, tuning, or articulation, you're more likely to notice it when you play your scales. For example, if your fingers aren't coordinated, you'll hear lots of glitches. It's also much easier to hear intonation issues across familiar tonal patterns like scales. So scales act sort of like a magnifying glass on all of your fundamentals. Scales also help our brain to hear phrases. Instead of thinking of scales as boring steps up and down, try to hear them as phrases with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Because scales are so ingrained in our psyche, this is relatively easy. So for example, try playing a scale, but stopping before you reach the end. Your ear will want so badly to hear that final resolution. That feeling of something of a full musical thought that needs to stay intact is what makes something feel like a phrase. And we can use that same sense of direction and arrival in our actual repertoire. A musical phrase isn't just a string of notes. As we learned in last month's expression walkthrough, it has momentum. It wants to go somewhere and it wants to say something. So when you start phrasing your scales intentionally, you're also teaching your brain to hear and shape phrases in everything else that you play. It becomes your default musical language. The other great thing about scales is that they're everywhere. Most of the music you play is essentially a collection of scales and various scale patterns. So when you practice scales musically, you're building fluency. You're rehearsing the exact shapes and gestures that show up in Mozart, Bach, Prokofiev, or pretty much any of the music on your shelf. If you've already trained your fingers, ears, and air to approach scales musically, then those tricky passages won't just feel easier, they'll actually sound better. And you won't have to add musicality in later. It will already be there, baked in from the start. When you start adding musical intention to your scales, you stop playing them on autopilot. Suddenly you have to listen to them differently. You're not just running your fingers, you're making choices. You're asking yourself, is this note leading somewhere? Does that articulation match the character I'm going for? Is my tone even from start to finish? That kind of intentional listening turns what could be mindless technique time into a much more creative and mindful practice session. You're not just building muscle memory here, you're building musical awareness, and that is the kind of practice that sticks. Let's be honest, most of us don't get excited about scales because they kind of feel like a chore, something we should do, something we need to get through. But when you start playing them musically with real phrasing and intention, they stop feeling like homework and they start feeling like real music. It's way more satisfying to play something that feels complete and expressive, even if it's just a one-octave scale. And the more satisfying it feels, the more likely you are to actually keep practicing it. So how exactly do we make a scale sound musical? This ties right back into what we explored in last month's expression walkthrough. We have lots of tools to shape our playing and bring the notes to life, including rubato, vibrato, tone color, and intention. But for today, we're going to focus on 3 core elements that can instantly transform a basic scale into something intentional and musical: tone, intonation, and dynamics and articulation. These are all elements that really start in your technique work. The more you use them, the more naturally they'll show up in everything else that you play.